You've always been a burden to this family, my sister Laura sneered as she pushed open my bedroom door. And honestly, no one wants you here, added her husband Nick without even looking up from his phone. The next morning, I packed my bags in silence, swallowing the lump in my throat that felt like a stone. They looked pleased, like they'd just won another round of chess, but they didn't know the real game was only beginning. 8 months ago, after my dad had a stroke, I moved back into my childhood home in the suburbs of Savannah, Georgia. I was 28, not exactly a dream, but who dreams of situations like that? Mom had to keep working. Her job gave us health insurance, and Dad needed care. I worked remotely as a freelance IT specialist, so I could be there. Laura and Nick rarely visited, maybe once a month, and only for a few hours. So when I heard their voices in the kitchen at 2 a.m., I was immediately on edge. I crept downstairs barefoot, holding a glass of water. I stopped a few steps from the bottom. The market is perfect right now, Nick whispered. If we convince them it's the best option, we're golden. The problem is Ella, Laura replied. She's always been Dad's favorite. You know how it is. If not a son, then a daughter with a backbone. I stood frozen, gripping the glass. That tone, it was all too familiar, just like when we were kids, and Laura would manipulate our parents to get what she wanted, even after being told no. The next morning, we were all at breakfast. Mom was making pancakes, her way of pretending things were normal. Laura hugged Nick and said sweetly, too sweetly, "We have some news. We've decided to sell our house." Mom almost dropped the spatula. "But you love that house." "We've been thinking a lot about family," Nick chimed in, "and we figured we should be closer, especially with Dad's condition." I looked at my dad. He didn't speak much after the stroke, but his eyes were still sharp. I saw something flicker in them. Suspicion? Fear? "We could stay here for a while," Laura smiled. "To help out. We are family." "Your room, Ella, would be perfect," Nick added, glancing at me. "You can work from anywhere, right?" Silence. Just the sound of pancakes sizzling. Mom turned off the stove slowly, weighing every move. "Ella takes care of Dad every day," she said finally, "and we're very grateful." "But 2 adults are more efficient," Nick pressed, "and we're willing to contribute financially." I sat, fork in hand, watching their little performance. In 8 months, Laura had visited 6 times. 3 of those visits were under an hour. Then the real invasion began. They started showing up every day unannounced. Nick accidentally wandered into Dad's room. Twice, I caught him snooping near the safe and documents. "Must be nice not paying rent, huh?" he said one night. "Time to grow up," Laura added with a smile as soon as Mom left the room. Then last night, while I was helping Dad with his physical therapy, they barged in. "We need to talk," Laura snapped. "Dad's already asleep," I said, helping him get comfortable. But Nick stood in the doorway, blocking me. "Stop resisting," Laura hissed. "You're just a burden." "Almost 30 and still living with Mommy and Daddy," Nick mocked. "Nobody wants you here." I looked at them, really looked. Laura's designer blouse couldn't hide the stress. Nick had dark circles under his eyes, his shirt was wrinkled, and he looked twitchy. "If you really care about this family," Laura said, "you'll step aside and let people who know what they're doing take charge." I didn't answer. Their obsession with control wasn't just annoying anymore, it was dangerous. I quietly went upstairs and packed a suitcase. I booked a motel just a few blocks away, but before I left I did 2 things. First, I ordered small security cameras. Nothing fancy, just hidden ones I could place in a vase or behind books. When I told Mom they were for Dad's safety, she agreed without hesitation. Second, I called the bank, not the local branch, the corporate fraud division. Something about how Nick was rummaging through our documents wouldn't leave me alone. I left in the morning. Laura and Nick looked smug like they'd won. While they picked out new curtains for my old room, I was installing cameras, checking Dad's accounts, and getting ready for war. Only a few hours after moving into the motel, the anxiety still hadn't gone away. I sat on the stiff bed, the old AC humming, eyes locked on my laptop where the camera feed played. At 10:57 p.m., the camera in my old room caught something chilling. "We don't have a choice," Nick paced by my desk. His voice trembled. "The deadline's in 2 weeks. If we don't fix this now, we're out on the street." "I know." Laura sat on the bed, holding her head. "But Dad's signature, Nick. This isn't just an idea anymore. This is forgery. If we get caught, it'll be too late. But if we don't, we fix everything." I paused the video, hands ice cold. They weren't selling their house. They were being evicted? I skipped ahead. There was a folder being opened. "I've already prepped the papers. We just need his signature. Once we get that, we can cover the debts, get a loan using the house as collateral." "And Ella?" Laura looked around nervously. She's checking everything. She suspects something. That's why we had to make her leave. My hands clenched into fists. This wasn't about my room. They were planning full-blown fraud. I opened another video, this time from Dad's office. A few hours before I left, Nick was going through files, envelopes, the safe. He was photographing things on his phone. Something snapped inside me. It was time to act. The next morning, I wasn't just a hurt daughter. I was a soldier in a family war. I met with an elder law attorney downtown. Miss Lindsay Brooks was stern, quiet, with a stare that could slice through steel. She listened without interrupting as I showed her the footage and laid out the facts. "This isn't just a family dispute, Ella," she said. "This is federal-level fraud, attempted mortgage scam, forged signatures, possible insurance fraud. It's serious." We filed an emergency petition for me to get guardianship over Dad, sent reports to the police and bank fraud units, and then I dug deeper. Through public records, I found a lot. Nick already had an open case for financial misconduct, and his company was under investigation. Several clients had filed lawsuits. I realized he wasn't just shady, he was a professional scammer. That evening, I returned to the house. Laura and Nick weren't there. They said they were looking for a new place. I suspected they were actually visiting banks or begging someone for a loan. "Ella?" Mom looked surprised when I showed up. "I thought you were staying at the motel longer." "Mom," I sat down beside her and opened my laptop. "There's something you need to see." First, the video from my old room. Then, the footage from the office. Finally, printed documents my lawyer helped me get. Fake loan applications, a mortgage form with a forged signature, a draft of a property transfer. Mom turned pale. Her hands trembled. "Oh God, what? They asked me to sign something yesterday. Said it would help with Dad's medical bills." "That wasn't help, Mom. That was a trap." Dad listened quietly. When I finished, he slowly reached out and squeezed my hand. "Stop them!" We signed papers canceling all powers of attorney, blocked any changes to Dad's finances, and filed a formal fraud alert with the bank. I even contacted 3 of Nick's former clients I found in the court records. As I left that night, Mom stood in the doorway and whispered, "I knew something was off. I just didn't want to believe it." "Now we believe facts," I said, "and we need to be ready. Tomorrow, family meeting, and this time Laura won't talk her way out of it." The next day, the air in the house was heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Dad sat in his wheelchair in the living room, Mom beside him, tense but with her head held high. I double-checked everything. Laptop open, recordings loaded, documents organized in neat piles. Attorney Lindsay Brooks stood at the kitchen table arranging papers with the precision of a surgeon. At exactly 5 p.m., a silver Tesla pulled into the driveway. Laughter, loud, fake. The front door opened, and in stormed Laura and Nick, arms full of luxury shopping bags. They looked like they had just wrapped up a shopping spree in Beverly Hills. "What's all this?" Laura froze when she saw the lawyer. Her smile faded instantly. "Having a little family meeting without us?" Nick added, scanning the room with a sharp look. "Sit down," Dad said, clearly, firmly. It was the first time he'd spoken so directly in months. His voice was low, commanding. They sat slowly. Laura reached for a glass of water, but even that small gesture betrayed her nerves. Nick sat across from me, stiff, still clinging to that arrogant confidence. He had no idea he was about to lose everything. Mom spoke first, calm, without yelling, but her voice carried years of disappointment. "Laura, we know about the forged signatures, the mortgage, the fraud." What? Mom, I didn't..." Laura tried to fake surprise, but her eyes showed pure fear. "There's been a misunderstanding," Nick cut in quickly. "Someone got the wrong idea." "I didn't get anything wrong," I said. "I recorded it." I pressed play. The room fell silent, dead silent, except for the voices echoing from the laptop. Laura and Nick's late-night conversation, their plan to forge Dad's signature, the confession that their house wasn't being sold, it was under foreclosure, and most of all, their clear admission that they forced me out because I was in the way. Laura went pale. You were spying on us?" "I was protecting our parents," I answered calmly. "From you." "This is a privacy violation," Nick exploded, standing up. "We'll sue." "Sit down." Lindsay's voice was like a blade. "Let's talk about the real violations. Fraud, identity theft, and financial forgery." She began laying out documents in front of them, one after another. "This is the mortgage application with Mr. Grayson's forged signature. These are bank statements. 3 credit cards opened in his name. These are copies of emails where Mr. Nicholas Stanton discusses illegal fund transfers." I didn't... This isn't what it looks like." Nick was no longer cocky. Sweat covered his face, and his hands started to shake. You opened credit cards in my father's name? Laura turned to him, her voice cracking. We agreed. Just the mortgage. Just one signature, Nick. What was I supposed to do? He snapped, finally losing control. After the investment disaster, everyone wanted their money back. I had to find a way. And you didn't tell me anything. Laura was on the verge of tears. You said we were just borrowing. Borrowing? Mom stood, her voice trembling with fury. From your father's retirement account? That's your idea of helping? It all exploded. Everyone was shouting. Accusations, panic, chaos. But in the middle of the storm, Dad sat still, staring directly at Laura. Then slowly, carefully forming the words, he said, You betrayed us. Laura gasped like he'd struck her. She lowered her head and whispered, voice breaking, We just didn't know what else to do. Now we do, said Lindsay. Ella's parents have already signed the necessary documents. Their accounts are protected. And yes, the authorities have been notified. You have no right, Nick shouted, backing toward the door. This is a setup. We didn't sign anything. There's more than enough evidence, Lindsay said, pointing to the window. Outside, 2 police cruisers were parked. Nick froze. His face turned white, and then he ran, but he didn't get far. Moments later, officers brought him out in handcuffs. He shouted about mistakes, framing, and betrayal. And Laura, she stayed seated, alone. No glossy smile, mascara smeared, hands shaking. When silence finally returned to the house, Mom reached for Dad's hand. We'll get through this, together. And I sat beside them thinking, this is only the beginning. That evening, the house was stretched tight, like a violin string ready to snap. The air felt heavy, not from heat, but from the weight of what was coming. The living room was spotless, like it was being prepared for someone important. On the coffee table sat a neatly stacked folder of documents, the laptop open and cued to the video recordings. Lindsay Brooks, the attorney with a voice like a scalpel and eyes that allowed no nonsense, was stationed at the dining table, spreading out papers like she was laying down her weapons for battle. Mom sat next to Dad, gripping his hand. Even in his wheelchair, he looked composed, his eyes silent but sharp. I stood by the stairs, fully braced. At 5:03 p.m., we heard it. The familiar hum of a silver Cadillac pulling into the driveway. A door slammed. Laughter followed. Carefree, clueless. Laura was laughing at something, and Nick cracked a joke, unaware that the laughter would soon turn to silence. They walked in, weighed down with shopping bags from Bloomingdale's and Saks Fifth Avenue. What's going on here? Laura froze, her smile instantly disappearing as she saw everyone sitting quietly. We didn't know this was going to be an intervention, Nick said, trying to keep his cool, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. Sit, Dad said slowly but firmly. His voice, deep, commanding, left no room for argument. Laura exchanged a quick glance with Nick. They both sat like actors stepping onto a stage with no idea what script they were about to perform. There's something you need to hear, Mom said, not looking at her daughter. For the first time, her voice wasn't soft. It was steel. I hit play. Their voices filled the room, Laura's and Nick's, caught in the dark of night, talking about the mortgage, about inevitable foreclosure, about needing to convince Dad to sign documents, about me, the obstacle that had to be removed, every word clear, every voice unmistakable. Laura went pale as chalk. You were recording us? She whispered, barely audible, her voice nearly broken. I was protecting our father, I answered calmly, from you. This is illegal, Nick shouted, standing up. We can sue for invasion of privacy. Sit down, Mr. Stanton, Lindsay interrupted, her voice quiet but heavy with authority. You've just been exposed for multiple crimes. Let's start with forgery, move on to identity theft, and wrap up with mortgage fraud. Everything is documented. She began laying out the evidence like playing cards. This, the fraudulent mortgage application signed in Mr. Grayson's name. This, the bank report showing 3 credit cards opened under his identity. And this, the email threads where you discuss borrowing from his retirement account. This is a setup, Nick muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. You can't prove anything. We already did, I replied calmly. Camera footage, audio files, paper trails. Oh, and your clients. I've already spoken to 3. One of them, a lawyer. Laura lowered her head, her hands trembling. For the first time, she said nothing. You said it was temporary, she whispered to Nick. You said we'd just sign a few things and fix everything. You lied to me. I was trying to save us, Nick exploded. After that investment tanked, we were drowning. And you, with your designer crap, only sped it up. And you, with your poker sites and offshore accounts, Laura snapped, her voice finally breaking free. The room burst into chaos. Accusations flew like hail. I stood to the side, watching their perfect image shatter into pieces. Then Dad spoke, slowly, clearly, pulling each word from somewhere deep inside. You tried to steal my life. Mom held back tears. I walked over and placed a hand on Dad's shoulder. We'll stop this, once and for all. This isn't over, Nick muttered, darting a glance toward the window. But outside, 2 police cars were parked. No sirens, but the flashing lights danced across their Tesla. It's over, Lindsay said, and it came right on time. The door opened, quietly, almost respectfully. 2 uniformed officers entered. One held a folder with a warrant. The other was already speaking into a radio. Nick froze, completely still. All his swagger evaporated. Mr. Nicholas Stanton? One officer stepped closer. You're under arrest for suspicion of fraud, identity theft, document forgery, and financial misconduct. Are you people insane? Nick backed into the coffee table. This is a mistake. It's her. She did this. He pointed at me, panicking. She manipulated you. This is a setup, a trap. We'll sort it all out in court, the officer replied calmly. Your emails, the camera footage, the mortgage documents. It's a long list, Mr. Stanton. Laura, tell them! Tell them this was your idea too! But Laura said nothing. She sat on the edge of the couch, hugging herself. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. Laura? Nick's voice cracked. He was no longer yelling. He was begging. We're a team. We've always been a team. No, Nick, she said quietly, but with finality. We were a team when I believed you were trying to save us, but now, I don't even know who you are. Nick looked around, desperate. When the officers cuffed him, he made one last pull free. You're all traitors. You, Ella, you destroyed me, he screamed as they let him out. I was saving you all. His voice echoed in the air long after the door shut behind him. The silence that followed was sudden. You could hear the kettle hissing in the kitchen. Mom sat down slowly, wiping her eyes. Dad stared at the door, motionless. Laura didn't move. In her hands, a photo frame, an old one. Us as kids. Her with scraped knees from always climbing trees. We were laughing, real, unfiltered laughter. I didn't know, she whispered, eyes still downcast. About the cards, the offshore accounts, how deep he took risks. But I wanted to believe. I sat across from her. For the first time in forever, I didn't feel angry, just tired. You had a choice, to tell the truth or to become his accomplice. You chose the second. You saw what I didn't want to see, she said, voice trembling. I don't deserve their forgiveness. Maybe not, Mom said, entering the room. But we don't destroy family. We try to heal it. Laura looked up, for the first time that night, with a flicker of hope. I'm filing for divorce, she said, and I'll cooperate with the investigation. I want to start over, if it's not too late. The next morning, I returned to the motel. The air freshener still lingered in the room, cheap and chemical, but my mind felt clear for the first time in weeks. I opened my laptop, checked the news. Nick was officially in custody. Preliminary charges had been filed. The hearings were coming soon. But something else had arrived. A new lead, because as it turned out, Nick was just the tip of the iceberg. A few days had passed since the arrest. The house was quiet, recovering. Dad spoke even less, watched everything with sharper eyes. Laura moved into the guest room while she worked through the legal mess. She spoke to her attorney daily, started therapy, helped with chores, and moved like a ghost. But I couldn't rest. Something in my gut told me Nick had left something behind. He was careful, calculated. He panicked, and in panic, even the smartest make mistakes. That night I climbed up to the attic. It was cool, dark, silent. The beam of my flashlight slicing through the old lives were everywhere. Children's books, faded blankets, and then a suitcase. Black, locked, with a sticker, property of NS. I froze, then knelt down and opened the lock. Inside was a laptop fully settled on it. Carefully, I carried it downstairs. Mom was asleep. Laura's door was shut. The nightlight glowed in the kitchen. I sat at the table, just like I used to as a kid, took a deep breath, and opened the computer. I knew one of Nick's fatal flaws. He thought he was too clever to ever be caught, and he loved one person more than anyone else. Himself. Access granted. And just like the world opened up before me. Dark, greedy, ruthless. The folders were named innocently. Projects, investments, taxes. But inside, it was something else entirely. One folder was called Harvest. I opened it and froze. Dates, bank accounts, copies of passports, forged signatures, scanned mortgage documents. The clients folder led to an even deeper abyss, hundreds of emails. Most had been deleted, but not permanently. Many detailed investment strategies that masked outright theft, retirement accounts drained from the elderly, small family businesses gutted, college savings wiped clean, and worst of all, her parents have no clue I already opened a card in their name. Old folks are the easiest marks. Laura has no idea, and she's better off not knowing. I'll let her feel in control while she buys another $800 handbag with her dad's pension. My chest tightened. My hands shook. But I didn't have the luxury of weakness. I transferred everything to a flash drive. The next day I met with the investigator Lindsay had already spoken to. But I wanted more than just an arrest. I wanted everyone to know who Nick really was. Then I remembered he had a LinkedIn profile, articles, posts about successful business ventures, followers, colleagues, partners, a perfect facade. I created an anonymous account and sent them all screenshots, emails, hard evidence. The first to respond were his victims. An elderly couple from Texas. Nick had helped them invest, then vanished with over $90,000. A veteran who had trusted Nick with his entire life savings. A coffee shop owner who lost her business after following his fake tax advice. They were shattered, angry, ready to act. We created a private group. They began preparing a class action lawsuit. And more importantly, they started speaking up. In comment sections, in reviews, on social media, Nick could no longer hide behind a suit and smile. Meanwhile, Laura was reading the emails. I had left her one printed page. No explanation. Just a line from Nick's email calling her the emotional lever I used to access her parents' assets. I found her in the kitchen an hour later, sitting on the floor, holding the paper like it burned her fingers. He used me, she whispered. This whole time, I was just his tool. He saw your weakness, I said, and turned it into a weapon. I don't even know who I am anymore. Then it's time to find out. A week after I found the laptop, the media picked it up. Headlines began to appear about Nicholas Stanton, financial advisor from Savannah, under investigation for large-scale fraud. His smiling, photoshopped headshot, once front and center on his company site, now flashed across headlines like Family Fraudster, Hundreds of Victims, Millions Lost, The Business of Betrayal. Justice had begun to stir. But in our house, it didn't feel like victory. Mom hardly left the kitchen. She baked constantly. Cookies, muffins, bread, like she was trying to fill the silence with cinnamon and vanilla. Dad spent his evenings in the study, listening to old records, staring out the window. And Laura, she was changing. At first, it was subtle. She started waking up earlier, cleaning the floors, trying to cook dinners, which, to be fair, should have stayed Mom's department. Then she began apologizing. Not just I didn't know. Real apologies. Through tears, with weight. One evening, I found her on the back porch. She was curled up in her old college hoodie, hunched over like a schoolgirl. In her hands, that same designer purse she once clung to like a trophy. "Remember how we fought when I bought this instead of paying off the car loan?" she asked bitterly, not looking at me. I said, "You only live once." "We do, but sometimes that one life needs to be used for redemption, not indulgence," I said. "Redemption," she repeated softly. "It's not about forgiveness, is it?" "No," I answered honestly. "It's about choosing not to be the person you used to be." A few days later, Lindsay called. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "One of the investigators flagged something in the financial records." "What?" I asked, already tense. "Some of the accounts used for laundering had a second authorized user, name Laura Stanton." It hit me like a hammer. I immediately pushed back. She told me she didn't know, that she was being used. "She might be telling the truth," Lindsay said calmly, "but now it's not up to the family. It's up to the court." I hung up and walked into the living room. Laura sat curled on the couch in a blanket. When I entered, she looked up, and she already knew. "They found my signature? They found proof of your involvement. Even if you didn't know the full scope, legally you're still inside this mess. So, I'm just like him now? No, but if you want to prove that, you have to act." "I will," she whispered. "What do I need to do?" The next morning, Laura went to the police, alone, not with an attorney, not with Mom holding her hand. Alone. She gave a full confession, handed over every email, every access code, everything she knew about Nick's schemes. She was processed officially, as a suspect, but also as a cooperating witness. The agents logged her statement and agreed to reevaluate her role, especially after she turned over a letter Nick had written 2 years ago. A letter where he admitted to manipulating family assets through her. Laura came home exhausted but calm. For the first time in months, she didn't flinch when she looked in a mirror. It's not a verdict yet, she told me that night, but now it depends on whether they believe I was coerced. I've seen you start to fight, I said. Now fight to the end. Not for me, for yourself. She nodded. And for everyone he stole from. I want to give something back. Maybe I can look Dad in the eyes again. While Laura was figuring out who she would become, I received a letter, not digital, a real handwritten one, from one of Nick's victims. Dear Miss Ella, I'm 78 years old. I lost all my savings because of that man. But thanks to you and your courage, I believe again, in justice, and in daughters who protect their parents the way they should. Thank you. P.S. I'm baking pies again. With real butter this time, I cried. Not from sorrow, from relief, because I knew there were more battles ahead. But we were no longer alone. The courtroom was cold, not from the air, but from the atmosphere. It was a federal building in Atlanta. High ceilings, sterile walls, silent professionals in suits. In every eye, scrutiny, control, law. This was the hearing. The people versus Nicholas Stanton. I sat behind the rail with Mom. Dad stayed home. We knew it would be too much for him. Beside the judge sat 2 federal prosecutors. On the defense, Nick's attorney, a smug man with a fake smile who acted like this was just a minor tax issue, not a years-long fraud that devastated lives, and Laura. She sat apart. Not on the defendant's bench, not with the witnesses. She had a special status, a co-conspirator turned state witness. Her hair was pulled back in a plain ponytail. Her suit was modest, her eyes hollow but determined. The judge called the court to order. The prosecutors laid out the facts. 37 defrauded clients, over $4 million laundered through offshore accounts, 3 credit cards in my father's name, a forged mortgage, a web of shell companies co-conspirators then. Laura was called to testify. I held my breath. She walked to the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, nodded, and spoke. My name is Laura Stanton, and I'm here because I was part of this crime, even if I didn't realize it for a long time. Tell the court how you got involved, the prosecutor asked. At first, it was Nick. He said we were just reinvesting. That the clients agreed, that family money was our asset. I signed documents without reading them. He convinced me it was for our benefit. Did you have doubts? I had questions, but when I asked, he got aggressive. In one of the letters I gave the prosecution, he wrote, "Don't break, Laura. It's all on you. If you go down, you won't go alone." The courtroom froze. The prosecutors nodded. Nick's attorney stood up to object. Your Honor, we believe Miss Stanton's testimony is unreliable. She acted under duress and her memory is compromised. You mean it's compromised now that she's no longer covering for you? The prosecutor snapped. I'm just protecting my client, the lawyer mumbled. Then Laura said something no one expected. He won't stop. The room fell silent. He's already been sending notes from jail, through others. I got one last week. It said, "It's still reversible. You're my key. Cross me, and you'll regret it." The judge looked up. Do you have a copy? Yes, she said, pulling out an envelope. I turned it over to the FBI. Mom squeezed my hand. Her fingers trembled, but not from fear, from fury. The judge called a recess. I followed Laura into the hall. You knew this would be risky, didn't you? I asked. Yes, but I'm done staying silent. She looked down. I'm not trying to justify myself. I just want to give our parents some peace. This isn't peace yet, I said, but it's a step toward it. That evening, we were home when a new message arrived, but not for all of us. For me, an anonymous email. You won this round, but chess isn't decided by the first move. You don't know who you're playing, Ella. You don't see all the pieces. I exhaled slowly. The enemy might be behind bars, but his reach wasn't gone. The fight wasn't over, and I wasn't backing down.